Welcome to the Soapbox. I'm Russell Conti. Today I'd like to demonstrate how to draft a pair of men's trousers with a flat front. Without further ado, let's get right to it. First thing you're going to need is a piece of dotting paper about 24 inches wide by its width. Our working measurements are going to be the waist of 34 inches, a seat of 40, our inseam of 32, and our side seam of 41. These are all finished garment measurements. You'll want a variform curve. 24 inches is helpful for doing the side seams. This is a modified French curve. A French curve works really well for the crotch. A 2x18 ruler and a 1x6 ruler is very helpful. Certainly a pencil and eraser is going to serve you well. A tailor's square, and if you have it, a yardstick. That's optional. The first thing we do is we're going to set our hem line. I classically just use a 2-inch hem, so I'm going to go ahead and draft from my left edge 2 inches up. I'm going to square all the way across. Closest to me, I'm going to give myself about 4 or 5 inches, and I'm going to square all the way to the top. This is going to work for our side seam architecture. And just square from one end to the other. The first thing we're going to do is assess our side seam length. Our side seam, once again, is 41 inches. So we're going to measure up 41 plus 1/2 inch for seam allowance at the waist. So we have 18, 36 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a half. There we go, and we're going to square right across. And we can go ahead and label that waist. We'll label this hem. Our next measurement is to find our inseam measurement. Our inseam is 32. We want to give ourselves a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so we're going to go up 32.5 inches. 18 plus 14 for 32.5 inch, and we're going to square across. And when you're squaring, go ahead and square toward yourself and away from yourself. Right across that line. Okay, so that's our inseam. It also is right where our crotch level is going to be. So I'm going to label that crotch. Now what I want to do is I want to find my knee position. My knee position is 1/2 the distance plus 2 inches toward the crotch. So I'm going to take this measurement, which is 32.5, divide by 2. That's going to give me 16.25, and then plus 2, 18.25 from the hem. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to square toward ourselves and away. We're going to label this knee. Now we need to find our seat level, which is equivalent to our hip, and that's a proportional measurement. We're going to derive that from other measurements. So we're going to take our seat, we're going to divide that by 16. That's going to give us 2.5 inches. We're simply going to measure up 2.5 inches and square across, and that's going to give us our seat level. Again, square toward yourself and away from yourself. We'll label that seat. Now we have all of our horizontal measurements. We have our hem level, our knee level, crotch level, seat level, and waist level. The next thing we want to do is find our center front. We're going to do that relative to our crotch level, and our center front is going to be 1/4 of the seat measurement plus 1/2 inch. And so 40 divided by 4 is 10 plus 1/2 inch, gives us 10.5 inches, and we're going to square up. Okay, we want to find our front extension. Our front extension equals our seat level. So we have 2.5 inches here, we're going to put 2.5 inches here. When we are finished with this draft, all of our seam allowances will be built in as well. Now here's our waist level at center front. We want to drop back 1/4 inch toward the side seam. And we're going to connect at seat level to that back off at the center front. Once we brought center front back 1/4 inch and connected at seat level, we're going to go ahead and connect seat level through the front extension with our French curve. Simply find a line on there that is nice and representative of what we're going for and continuous from this line here for our center front, and draw that in. Next thing we want to do is go ahead and find our side seam at the waist. We're going to measure from the front 1/4 of our waist measurement plus 2 seam allowances. Our seam allowances are going to be built in. They're 1/2 inch each. So 34 divided by 4 is 8.5 plus 2 inches for our seam allowances. It's going to be 9.5. We're going to come from center front 9 1/2 inches and square up. Now most people have a tilted rise. That simply means it's going to be a little lower in the front, a little higher on the side, higher in the back. We're going to go ahead and take up our side seam 1/4 inch. And so we have that position. Now before we finish this, we're going to go ahead and find our grain line, which is going to be 1/2 the distance of the crotch level from the front extension to the side seam. And in this case I have right at 13 inches, so we're going to go at 6.5 and we're going to square up and down. That becomes our grain line. It also becomes our crease line. Now from center front, where we tilted back, this remains flat. From the grain line to the side seam, this comes up on a very gradual curve. And there we have it. Now we're going to connect our side seam at the waist through to our crotch seam. And we want this to be a gentle curve. So I'm going to put my pencil there, find something that's pleasing to my eye, and bring it down to the crotch level. Now we finish the waist from center front to the side seam. We've also finished our side seam down to our crotch level, and we also have our front extension. Everything on the top is done at this point. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and find our knee position and our hem. Regardless of the waist measurement or the seat measurement used for your draft, retain a 20-inch circumference for the knee and an 18-inch circumference for the hem. Later on, you can always scoop that out, you can always make it smaller, but for the draft, this will make the draft work more successfully when we get ready to work on the back. Now, we want to take this measurement 20, and we want to divide that in 4. So that's going to give me 20 divided by 4 equals 5. However, classically the front is 1 inch smaller than the back, so we need to pass some of that pattern to the back of the garment. So if I take away 1/2 inch from the front and add it to the back, that'll give me a full inch in the back. The math hurts a little bit, but no worries. So we're going to take 5, we're going to subtract 1/4 inch, because 5 on either side, 1/4 on this side, 1/4 on this side, gives me 4 3/4. And then I have to add back a seam allowance, which is 1/2 inch. So from the grain line, we're going to go out 5 1/4 on this side and 5 1/4 on this side at the knee level. We're going to do the same thing at the hem level, except it's going to be 18. So we're going to take 18, divide that by 4, equals 4 1/2. We're going to subtract 1/4 inch from either side, 1/2 inch total to pass to the back. So that's going to make this 4 1/4. But then we have to add back in our seam allowances on either side, 1/2 inch. It makes it 4 3/4 inch. From the grain line, we have it. Now we're ready to go ahead and connect our hem to our knee. On the side seam and the inseam. Now from the knee level to the crotch level at the inseam, we're going to go ahead and create ourselves a reference line. It's just going to be connect the lines with a dash line is fine. We're going to take 1/2 of that distance and we're going to square in. I have 14 1/4, so that's going to be 7 1/8. I'm going to square in from that position. I'm going to scoop this out 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to put 3/8 of an inch mark there on that side. I'm going to do the same thing on the excuse me, On the knee level, this time I'm going to go from the knee to the crotch. Divide the distance. I have 14 1/4 again, so 7 1/8. I'm going to square in, and on this side, instead of 3/8, I'm going to go into 1/4 inch. Okay. On the inseam, it's going to be a curve. Take either side of the curve, what works for your eyeball, and in this case, it's just a little bit deep. So I'm going to take it on the other side. I want to connect this line, if I can, from the knee level. So there we have it. That looks pretty good. Connect from knee level through that reference up to center front extension, and we're done with this portion. Again, this can always be scooped out later on if we want a little tighter fit. Now what we're going to do on the side seam, we're going to give ourselves this gentle S curve. So connecting the line from below the knee level, come across, turn my ruler over, and try to find something that is, again, pleasing to the eye. And gentle. So there's a good line right there. Don't want that one there. It's a little too deep. And there's our basic draft for the front pant piece. Now that our front pattern draft is complete, we're ready to complete the back. What we're going to do is from the hem level to the knee level, we're just going to add 1/2 inch on either side. And that will give us the total we need, 1 inch larger in the back than the front. Straightforward and very simple on that portion. Okay, now that we've got that portion complete, we can go ahead and work our way for the back extension. Our back extension is equal to the front extension, which is also equal to the seat. So that's 2.5 inches here, 2.5 inches here, 2.5 here from the front extension. Back extension is equal to our front extension. We come out 2.5 inches and we square down. We want to square down about 1 inch. We want the inseam of the back of the pant to be about 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch shorter than the front inseam, simply to accommodate for the extra bias that's there, and will keep the pant from sagging. So what we're going to do is we're going to give ourselves a reference line first, and typically what I do is I just come down about 5/8 to 3/4 inch as a starting place. I'm going to connect those together with a reference line, and we're going to do very similarly to what we did on the front. We're simply going to divide the distance in half. It's roughly 14 inches. 7 I'm going to square in. In this case, I may come in about 1/4 to 3/8 inch, maybe even 1/2 inch, depending on how the curve looks. So I'm going to put it at 1/2 inch and see what I get. Again, I want to keep it continuous through the knee level as much as possible. It's not going to be entirely possible, so we're not going to worry about it too much, but what I do want to do is connect here through my reference line and connect into my knee level. I just want to make certain I don't get a sharp point at that junction there. Now what I'm going to do before I move on, I'm simply going to measure this distance on the front inseam from the knee to the crotch level. And I have 14 3/8. So I want the back to be 14 inches to 14 1/8 inches in length, no more than that. And I have right at 14, so I'm in great shape. If I needed to, I could elongate it simply by bringing up that line a little bit, or bringing it down. Now we can go ahead and finish the back extension if we like. And what we're going to do is we're just simply going to take the front, center front, to the grain line and divide that in half. We have 3 3/4, so that's going to make it 1 7/8, and I'm going to square up. Once I've done this, to find the height of this, I'm going to take 1/32 of the seat measurement, which is classically about 1 1/4 inch for this rise right here, for the back rise. So I'm going to find that, and I'm simply going to connect the back rise through the seat level. Okay, once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and take my French curve and connect through to my back extension. Now make certain that you don't scoop this out. We don't want this to come deep and then come up. We want it to be a continuous line here. So the best thing to do is just simply place your ruler like that, then bring your French curve in and connect the two. So that looks like it's coming in just a little bit too much. Just a little bit. Yep, there we go. And there we have our back extension. It comes through my front extension a little bit here. No worries there. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, depending on how you use your curve. But the deeper the curve is here, the more cutout I'm going to have and the less fabric I'm going to have. So if I leave it a little high, that's not a problem. I can always nip that fabric later on. What you'll notice as we're going on is we're just building the back over the front, and then we'll pull these pieces apart later on when we're ready to transfer our patterns. Now for our side seam, at the seat level, we're going to come out 1 1/4 inch from our side seam for the front. We're going to take a reference line from knee level through that line at the seat level. That's 1 1/4 inch. This is just temporary, so we can see where everything is. And we're going to square out all the way up through the waist level. I'm going to go ahead and bring my waist level over to my back. So remember, we came up 1/4 inch at the side seam. We're going to come up 1/4 inch at the back. And this is just going to be for reference for the time being. What we want to do is we want to mirror this soft S curve that we've created for the front. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to find half the distance. It should be very close to what we did before. I have 14 3/8, so I'm going to come over 7 3/16. I'm going to square in. And I'm just going to mirror, give myself that 1/4 inch mark there too. I'm going to mirror what I did on the front. And I'm going to flip my ruler and bring it to the sides, to the back at the crotch level. Perfect. Now, a couple more things we need to do. We can, later on, we can walk the pattern, but if we do this now, our need to walk the pattern later will be negligible. What I want to do is I want to measure from the knee level to the crotch level on my S curve on the front seam and see what that distance is. In my case, I have 14 5/16 just to be annoying. And so I'm going to go ahead and measure that same distance on the back from the knee level to the crotch level. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/16, and I'm just a little bit below my crotch level from the front. That's going to be my notch. Okay? So everything gets, the back mirrors the front. So whatever this is from the knee to the crotch on the front is what it becomes the knee to the crotch level at the back. And my notch is going to be adjusted on the back to reflect so that it matches to the front. Now I'm going to measure the crotch level to the waist level on the front, and then I'm going to duplicate that on the back. In my case, I have 9 1/4 inch, so I'm going to take from my new notch point 9 1/4 inch, and I happen to be right at waist level, so that's perfect. I'm good to go. Now finally, what we want to do is we're going to give ourselves a little reference line here from waist level to my center back seam. Okay, and then I want to do the same thing that I did for the front. I want to take 1/4 of the waist measurement, which is 8.5, plus my seam allowances, which is 9.5, but I also need to add in a dart, which is going to be a dart uptake of 3/4 inch. So we have 8.5, which is 1/4 of the waist, plus our seam allowances, 1 inch for 2 1/2 inch seam allowances, and then plus 3/4 inch for a dart. So 8.5 plus 1 is 9.5, plus 3/4 is 10 1/4. I'm going to measure from center back over 10 1/4 inches, and that's going to be where our side seam comes in. Normally it's about 1/4 inch shallow of what we place. Now what we're going to do is to finish the side seam from the waist down to the crotch is we're simply, again, we mirrored our front for the knee level to the crotch level. Now we're going to take our crotch level up to the waist with a nice gentle curve into the waist. And now we have our side seam for the back. And now the final thing we need to do is go ahead and find our dart position. Normally for me, I simply take the measurement, I divide in half. So we have 10 1/4, so I have 5 1/8. And I come toward the side seam 1/2 of an inch. That's just for initial placement. We can always adjust that if we need to, but I find it works pretty well. We want to square down from the waist level 3 1/2 inches. Standard dart take up for a man is 3 inches, and so we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance built into the waist, so we want to come down 3 1/2 for our vanishing point. Again, it's 3/4 of an inch take up on either side of the dart, and then there becomes our dart for the center back. I'm sorry, our dart for the waist on the back of the pant. Then we would go ahead and pinch this together and true up our waist. And we're also going to square across on either side of the dart for our pocket position. Our pocket is typically 5 1/4 inches, so we're going to come over 2 5/8 on either side to give us the end of the pocket. And then we're going to come in 1/4 of an inch on either end for our punch hole. Right there and right there. Come up 1/2 inch from the end of the dart for our back off. Now we have our pocket position for the back of the pant. Once we've completed the front and the back of the pant, we're ready to do the waistband. I simply take my dotty paper, my drafting paper, and I just trace a line from side to side, and then I go ahead and start drafting upon the top of that. What I'm going to do is I need a seam allowance first, so I'm going to go ahead and add a seam allowance at the bottom, and this is going to be a 2-piece fold over waistband. So there's 1/2 of an inch at the bottom. And the standard waistband is 1 1/2 inches wide. And then I'm going to go ahead and place that. So I have my seam allowance, now I need my waistband. And it's going to be fold over, so can be the facing of it, the front of the waistband or the inside, but we need the fold over portion, so we're going to do 1 1/2 inches once again. And then once we do this, finally we'll add one more seam allowance of 1/2 of an inch. Now I'm just going to find a place that looks reasonably centered to this, and it's going to be my center back. I'm simply going to square up and down. Okay, and then I need to add a seam allowance to either side of that. For tailoring, we use 1 1/2 inches. For standard construction, we use 1/2 of an inch. So I'm going to give a 1/2 inch seam allowance to either side. When I'm completed, I will have my right waistband over here, my left waistband over here. I like to have them separated at the center back, simply if I need to make any alterations to the pant, it makes it a little bit faster. Now, I need my 1/4 mark of my waist measurement. Remember, we have a 34-inch waist. We're going to divide that by 4. So from my sewing line, I need to measure over 8 1/2 inches to the left and to the right. So I'll do 8 1/2 this way. And we'll just continue in this direction for the time being. So here's our side seam. And then our center front is going to be another 8 1/2. We're going to give ourselves a right extension of 1 1/2 inches. And then finally, a seam allowance of 1/2 of an inch. We can go and square all those up and down. And my right waistband is done. Now we'll do the same for our left waistband. From our sewing line, 8 1/2 inches. find our side seam. Another 8.5 inches to find center front, and a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Here's our cut line for center back. Here is our sewing line for center back. We can identify that CBR for center back right, CBL for center back left. We're going to place a notch here and here, here and here. Sometimes we like to do a double notch to indicate that this is the center back. We'll do a notch at our side seam, at our front extension, and also at our front sewing line. Sometimes people like to notch a center to show where the fold line is. Do the same thing over here. Notch at the side seam, notch at our sewing line, and then also notch for our fold line. And our waistbands are complete. Now ready to create the front fly and the front pocket pieces. What I've done is I've traced off a portion of the front of the pattern so I can do that independently. I'm going to start with a fly first. Right at the seat level, I'm going to come down 3/4 of an inch. That's going to be my zipper stop notch, and then I'm going to come 3/4 of an inch below that as well. At the top, I'm going to come in 2 inches. Remember, we have our seam allowance built in already, so that'll give us an 1.5 inch front extension position. And then I'm going to come in about 1 7/8 inches at the seat level, just to taper it a little bit for shaping. And we'll pull this curve in. And there's our fly. Now the one thing about this fly, make certain when you transfer this piece, place your grain line on there, but you also need to mirror image the fly for a men's trouser. I've completed my fly. We're ready to go ahead and do our side slant pocket. You'll notice that I've traced off my seam allowances, 1/2 inch at the waist, 1/2 inch at the side seam, because that's going to be important to identify what our pocket opening is going to be. What we can do first is, if we're doing a fold over pocket, I'm going to go 1/2 inch in front of the grain line and then square down. That's going to be the front of my pocket. I can square down as far as I want. Normally, I like to make my pocket bag about 5 inches in depth below the crotch line. Just gives you a nice deep pocket. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That'll work. And I'm simply going to square across to the side. This is going to be my fold line. Okay, so we have that portion of it completed. What we want to do now is go ahead and create our pocket opening. For a men's trouser, the pocket opening is usually about 6 to 7 inches in length. It's very important that you have your seam allowances, your sewing line, in place so you can identify what the finish line is going to be. Because if I find 7 inches going from cut line to cut line, my pocket bag is going to, or my pocket opening is going to be very short. So I need to make certain I'm doing it from sew line to sew line. I'm going to do a slant pocket that goes 1 inch in from the sew line, or 1.5 inches from the cut line at the top. So that's going to give me my reference line for the top of the pocket bag. Sorry, the top of the pocket opening. And then I'm going to come down 7 inches. And I'm simply going to take this and find that reference point over here. And I like a little bit of shape. From here to here. So there's my pocket bag. I'm just going to give myself a little bit of inward shape. There we go. That gives me my pocket opening. At the bottom, I'm going to square to the side seam. And then I have to remember to add in my seam allowance, because at this point I have a cut line, but I don't have I have a sew line, but I don't have a seam allowance. So I want to go ahead and trace that in real quickly. And then to the side. There we go. Now I'm going to have a notch right here at the bottom of the pocket opening on the sew line. That's going to go on the pocketing itself, and it's going to go on the side seam as well. I'm also going to have a notch up here on my pocketing, right at the sew line. Now I need to create my front facing and my back overlay. The front facing is the part that's going to fold to the back on the front of the pant, and the back overlay is going to be in self, so that when we see that slant opening right there, we're not going to see pocketing. What I normally do is I go about 1 inch in from my sew line and about, it depends on my mood, about 1.5 inches at the sew line at the bottom of the pocket opening. So I'm going to come down, and I want to go at least 1/2 inch below that pocket opening and come across. So there is my front facing piece. Now for my back facing piece, I'm going to go out another inch and go down another 1/2 inch. I come down another 1/2 inch so I can reduce bulk there at the side seam. We don't want these laying and matching up right here because there would be too much bulk. If we want to, we can go ahead and curve out that edge right there, and get rid of that, and curve that as well. Get rid of that. These edges eventually will be overlocked or folded back depending on how you're finishing. Now that my front facing and my back overlay are in place, I'm ready to go ahead and complete my pocket bag. Now I want my pocket bag to float freely at the bottom. I don't want it sewn into the side. If you wanted to, you could simply go ahead and transfer this all the way into the side seam, but I want to reduce that so that it has some movement in there. So 1 inch below the back overlay, I'm going to place a little line, and then I'm simply going to follow my seam allowance line for the bag itself, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of curve right there. And then right here at the side, where it comes in transitions to the side seam, I'm going to give myself another little curve. Now right now it looks like it's going to compete for our sewing line, but it's not, because remember we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance built in, so that's going to push the bag over a little bit further. So now we have our pocket bag, our back overlay, and our front facing all ready to go. Now we're prepared to draft our pocket pieces for the back pocket. I'm going to be doing a double welt pocket. We don't need to do it directly on the pant. What I'm going to do is I'm simply going to give myself a grain line to give me the center of the pocket. This is going to fold up on itself. And then somewhere about half the distance I'm going to square across. So this will be the fold line for the bottom of the pocket. I'm going to measure up 10 inches from that fold line and square across, and 10 inches below the fold line and square across. Now this is going to indicate my waistline. As you may recall, our dart placement was 3.5 inches below the waistline, so I'm just going to place that, and it's going to be my pocket opening right there. I'm going to square across on that as well. So 3.5 inches from the waistline. Again, don't forget this is going to fold up on itself. And then our pocket opening is 5.25 inches wide. So I'm simply going to place this so I have a reference for it. It's only going to help me create my pocket pieces. So 2 5/8 on either side gives me 5.25 inch opening. So now I know that based upon that opening, I need another inch on either side for my seam allowances. And so I'm going to square down from that. So in this case, that's 2 5/8 plus another inch, so it's going to be 3 5/8 from the center line, or an inch beyond our pocket opening on either side. Now that we have our basic pocket bag in place, what we want to do is we want to taper the tops. And it's going to be the top as well. Remember, it's going to fold up. You want to taper those because it's going to take up too much space at the waistline. So we're going to bring that in 1/2 inch, 1/2 inch. And we can go ahead and about 3 inches down is how I taper it myself. That's going to go away. And the same thing over here. Do the same thing here, because don't forget it's going to fold back on itself, and that's 3 inches. we go. Look at that. Now there's the shape of our pocket bag. The last thing we need to do is determine is where our pocket bag back overlay is going to be. So this is all out of pocketing, but we need a piece of self that's going to be sewn into here on the other side, so when it folds up, you don't see pocketing material. We need to identify where our back overlay is going to be placed. Our back overlay for my purposes is I simply measure down to where my pocket opening is and back off 1/2 of an inch. So I came down 3.5, I'm going to back off 1/2, so I'm going to come down 3 inches for my back overlay. The depth of my back overlay is roughly 2 inches, so I usually just use my ruler for that. I'm going to square across. There we are. Now the next thing we want to do is we don't want it to sew all the way to the edges because we don't want all that additional bulk in there. So we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance here. Okay, so I need it to be captured in the seam allowance, so I'm going to basically just take off 3/8 of an inch. And that way, it'll get caught in the seam allowances but won't impact the fold back. I typically like to do this as a French seam. So this portion right here is going to be our back overlay shape. Now we need to give us our back offs on both sides. I do 1/8 and 1/8. Some people do 1/4 and 1/4. So there's our back offs. And that's the only part we would address on the pocketing itself. This is just for reference for building the pocket. So the pocket opening does not get referenced on the pocket bag itself, but we do have the drill points or the tailor tacks for indicating where the back overlay is going to be. You will trace this piece off for the back overlay out of self, and then you'll trace off the balance of it for the pocketing. We're going to have a notch here at the fold on both sides. We're going to have a notch 1/2 inch in. We'll have a notch at the center. The center is going to line up right with our dart. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. Remember, this is going to fold back up on itself. There's a notch there, and then finally a notch there. Once you've completed the back overlay and the pocketing, you still have to do your piping for the double welt pocket, and then use the system that you would normally use for that. In the tailoring world, we just use the width of the unfinished pocket by 1.5 inches for the upper piping and 2 inches for the lower piping. In the commercial world, you typically fuse it and you use 1 inch and 1 inch.